Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Do I Have Time for This? The series that looks at old and new video games, from indie to AAA and everything in between, to help you figure out if you have the time to play, finish, 100% complete a game, or just leave it in your backlog to forever gather dust. Today we're diving into the indie action platformer Nine Sols. With the reductive elevator pitch of Hollow Knight meets Sekiro, Nine Sols is a huge departure from Red Candle Games' previous title, the fantastic side-scrolling J-horror Detention. Self-described as featuring a Sekiro-inspired combat system, Nine Sols dials back the exploration and Metroidvania aspects of the game to serve as a story with complicated narrative themes, amazing art design, and an incredible level of combat polish. Set in New Pengley, you play as Yi, a small fuzzy cat person known as a Solarian.
I am the very model of a scientist Solarian. I've studied species Turian, Asari, and Batarian. I'm quite good at genetics.
No, not a Salarian, a Solarian. And whilst Yi's motives and role in the world is left a mystery to begin with, you'll soon find yourself embroiled in a futuristic pseudo-Japanese world with technology far advanced beyond anything we humans could come up with. To give much more away would be a spoiler, but rest assured as you sit enjoying some tea in the Cherry Blossom Village, know that not all is as it seems. The introduction to Nine Sols is slow and very story-focused, with a lot of cutscenes and essentially codec calls to flesh out the world and set up the mystery of what it is you're doing and how you plan to get revenge on the lady who leaves you for dead at the beginning of the game. Whilst there is a lot of combat and a fair amount of platforming to do, I don't feel like the game ever really takes you away from these story-laden moments. You're never too far away from a call or cutscene to further flesh out the world. I was actually quite surprised at how much story there was here, expecting it to be your typical obscure story with everything hidden away in item descriptions and optional dialogue, a la Dark Souls. Don't get me wrong, you're definitely missing out if you don't engage in these optional conversations and item descriptions, but there's a lot of really in-depth narrative on display up front here, with some really deep themes to explore for lore aficionados. So let's get on to the meat and potatoes of Nine Sols, and honestly, the main reason I wishlisted this game 2 years ahead of its release, the combat. I don't know about you, but typically when I hear Dark Souls inspired combat these days, I can't help but roll my eyes as the Souls-like genre is getting a little overstuffed. When I heard that this was Sekiro inspired, however, I jumped at the chance to check it out and I wasn't disappointed. Whilst you only have a basic 3-hit attack, you also have an extremely refined parry system, alongside a few other tools to help you in combat. Parries here can either be perfect or imperfect deflections, with visual and audio feedback for both. Perfect parries cause internal damage to enemies and grants you a key charge. If you follow up on this internal damage with a talisman attack, Yi will charge past the enemy and after a short delay will explode said talisman, causing huge damage. This is the main combat loop for the game. Parry attacks, generate key charges, and use them to inflict huge damage to enemies. Trust me, it's not as complicated as it sounds. Performing an imperfect parry on the other hand will cause Yi to take the internal damage instead. A piece of damage which you can heal back over time, but if you're hit whilst your health bar is red, you'll take a massive health loss. Imperfect parries, luckily, will also generate key charges. You will also get a ranged weapon with multiple projectile types to help with multiple enemy encounters, which ramp up significantly as the game goes on. The skill tree is fairly extensive, but mainly offers damage buffs, extra key charges for talisman attacks, or new ways to carry out your talisman attacks, but nothing I'd consider game-changing like a new attack combo or special moves to inflict heavy damage on the enemy. You also have charm slots called Jades, which you can equip for a bit of build variety, although I found a few good ones at the start and never really switched them out. The charms also don't have any interconnecting features like you'd see in Hollow Knight, which is a bit of a shame. Alongside using the skill tree for progression, the central parry mechanic will also be upgraded over the course of the game, allowing you to parry previously unblockable attacks to open up a window for a heavy punish of your own. Given the parry is at the core of Nine Sols, I found it inspiring that this was how Red Candle Games implemented some light Metroidvania elements into the game. Objects and obstacles that you previously couldn't bypass can be revisited with these new parry upgrades to unblock or reach new areas. And whilst these areas 90% of the time are mandatory to complete the game, it always felt fun to go back with a new upgrade and see where I could go next. This gets me onto the world map itself, which I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of.
Hi, please take this map. Take a map.
Don't get me wrong, this isn't a complaint that the map was too big or too small. I found that Nine Sols offered a great amount of content for what this type of game should. My issue was with the interconnectivity of it. The way the map works is, whenever you reach an area, you'll want to find the guide for the section. These are robots who give out a data chip, which will turn the blank overview map section into a detailed layout of what the area actually looks like, along with a counter for mini-bosses, treasure chests, and lore items. The game also gives you a fun little dilemma, in which you have the option to either forcibly take the data chip, essentially killing the robot, or you can spend some hard-earned currency to get it from them non-violently. Whilst this choice amounts to no real consequence save for an achievement or two, it was fun to see the dialogue each robot came back with when I suggested I was going to steal their data chip. In terms of the map interconnectivity itself, quite a few of the sections of the map are connected by elevators, cargo systems, and bridges. My issue with them is, it's more or less unnecessary for this to be the case. For the most part, each area is its own individual stage to complete before moving on to the next one, and save for a hidden mini-boss or chest, there's no real reason to keep coming back to the areas, and by the time you do, you'll have the inevitable bonfire teleport mechanic which shows up in every Souls-like game. Honestly, if I finally open a shortcut to a stage, I really want that to mean something, not to just walk across a bridge, go, oh, I'm here, and then turn back around and go back to what I was doing. Now for what everyone who is still watching is probably shouting at the screen. Well, what about the bosses? So, without spoiling anything, the main bosses revolve around you collecting 9 Soul Seals, hence the game's title. I'd say the first half of these bosses are your standard fare, some of which can actually be challenged in non-linear fashion. This handful of beginner bosses will at times push you to frustration with their second phase, but my word does this game's bosses go into overdrive in the second half. Both from a design perspective, scale, and outright showmanship, these bosses excel in literally every way. They will push you to the edge of your sanity at times. In some cases, the boss fight would start and I'd be dead in 30 seconds, only for me to have it nailed by attempt number 4. The speed and level of parrying required to defeat these bosses, alongside being able to recognize attack patterns and tells, is insane. They feel so well tuned they'd fit right in alongside the Sekiro grades. I'd also like to shout out the final boss of this game, where if you go for the quote-unquote true ending, it's one of the hardest bosses I've fought in a long time. I'm putting them up there with the Nameless King from Dark Souls 3 and Orphan of Kos from Bloodborne. They are that difficult. The mini-bosses on the other hand, whilst difficult, pale in comparison to the second half of the main story bosses. They're all really just big versions of common enemies with a health bar, and maybe a new attack or two thrown in. In a lot of cases I found these bosses just whilst exploring, and they definitely challenge me at times, but they aren't really any sort of spectacle or true challenge. A true piece of innovation when it comes to the bosses of Nine Sols is how area exploration often leads you to ways to gain the advantage in boss fights, such as destroying a shield generator hidden just outside their arena, hacking an access gate to pilot a mech to even the odds in a fight, or doing something sneaky in order to gain an upper hand in Phase 1. This is how exploration should be rewarded in games. The last thing worth mentioning gameplay wise are the hacking minigames, which take 2 forms. Either the directional arrow inputs, which you'll be a master of if you played Helldivers 2 like me, or the Mystic Nymph puzzles, where you fly a small drone around small obstacle course to hack a node. These are just fun little additions to the game, and for the most part don't offer much in the way of a puzzle challenge, but it's still a good diversion from the intense combat. Indie games often get creative with their visuals, with them having to be budget conscious and not thinking about putting the right amount of peach fuzz on a character's face. It really frees them up to create something that truly stands out, and Nine Sols has absolutely aced this. The futurism and technology on display, crossed with the classic Japanese architecture, really just hits all the right notes for me as a huge fan of Japan. The cartoony coloration allows for both Yi and enemy attacks to flourish, with vibrant red and green hues to visually indicate how you're supposed to handle the attack. Environment wise, a lot of the areas do look very similar, and often just use a colour palette change to show you're in a different area. But the standout sections where you get a unique zone or set piece is so stunning, with the world so heavily influenced by scientific progression gone unchecked by a moral code. Notably, Peach Blossom Village just feels so lived in during the opening of the game, and the dream sequence that I refuse to spoil because of just how incredible it looks, you get to see Red Candle Games flex some of the horror muscles we saw in Detention all those years ago. Cutscenes, whilst well directed and detailed, also cut away to manga style panels, with its own unique art style that felt somewhat out of place to begin with, but I grew to look forward to the panels accompanying each boss fight. As for enemy design, I'm not particularly impressed with a lot of the generic grunt enemies. The bosses are all unique visually, and in the latter half offer some incredible designs, but the large majority of rank and file enemies are just cyborg samurai with different weapons. And don't get me wrong, I love a samurai as much as the next person. And gameplay wise, the different enemies provided a fresh gameplay challenge, but they do look very similar in design. The last few enemy types they did add in for the end of the game, whilst visually striking and from a storytelling perspective very on theme, they were just annoying to fight. The music here is also top notch, mixing techno with Japanese music depending on the situation, gave the right sense of urgency and scale whenever it was required. Truly a shout out to the music department here. So, let's get down to it. How long does this game take? In my playthrough, getting 100% area completion and the true ending, it took me around 26 hours, and a good 3 hours of that was on the final boss. If you're mainlining the story and not worrying about upgrades, I'd say it'll take around 20 hours. With that, a small amount of Metroidvania content of full completion following a guide, to avoid missable achievements, it's probably about 30 hours. Once you've completed the game, the save state will revert prior to the ending sequence, allowing you to see the other ending, something I think should be in all games with multiple endings to avoid forcing multiple playthroughs. In terms of replay value, the story will always play out more or less the same way, and whilst you can take some bosses or areas in any order, nothing really changes in terms of the gameplay or story itself. With only standard and story difficulty modes and the option to replay the endings, the only real reason you'd go back through is for achievements you missed, which sadly I'll have to do for one pesky missable achievement. It's also worth mentioning that the story mode actually provides you with custom sliders for damage dealt and received, so if you just want to experience the story, you can make the game a breeze. Just watch out as certain achievements get locked out when you do this. When it comes to respecting your time, Nine Souls fortunately is one of the Souls-like with a pause button, letting you step away at any time, and the checkpoints are very easy to come back to with shortcut ropes and doors everywhere to avoid you losing too much progress upon death. This game works great on the Steam Deck and is definitely playable in short bursts. You might only hit a wall when it comes to the boss difficulty later in the game, and even then, they have all the checkpoints right outside their arena, so this game really does respect your time as a player. Nine Souls costs less than half the price of your standard AAA game, and clocking in at 30 hours worth of gameplay that doesn't overstay its welcome or get boring at any point, I'd say there's plenty of value for your money here. I strongly recommend Nine Souls. This game has incredible art direction, world building, an engaging story around scientific progression, responsibility, and artificial intelligence. Now couple that with a pixel-perfect, satisfying to master combat system, and you really do have a hidden gem that only indie studios seem to be able to create. This game is the perfect length for its genre, and at a reasonable price point, Red Candle Games have created an indie masterpiece here, and I'm eager to see what's next, with better, more meaningful map interconnectivity, and some more Metroidvania elements thrown in for the Hollow Knight fan in me. I'd happily give this top scoring. Whether the next game is horror, action platformer, or something else, I will definitely be there to experience it. Do you think you have time for Nine Souls? On this channel I like to give my thoughts on the game, alongside a bit more of a deep dive on the time you have to invest, so you know what you're getting into, because time is precious, right? If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, feel free to like and share. If you subscribe, I'm looking to put out regular content like this, alongside some more in-depth video essays and freeform videos, so stick around, and if you have any requests on future videos, just drop them in the comments. And finally, if you want to come chat with me, you can find me over on x.com/gracious_rhino. I'm Gracious Rhino, look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.